Thank you. Questions? Yes, yourself.
Thank you. Well, this is very interesting. This looking at the very early Patočka, and I think it should be said at the very beginning, and you were perhaps too conscious to Patočka not to mention it, that the text is very much a beginner's work, right? He was 24, but he did not get, unlike your 20-30-year-old students, he did not get any decent philosophical education. So it is very much a kind of muddled, often uninformed and so on piece of text, not very long at the same time. But nonetheless, of course, it is already Patočka. And despite his poor philosophical education and so on, he was developing some of the thoughts that he was pursuing in the rest of his life. So it is very interesting. I'm sure if you do the analytic work in the book and focus on precise thoughts that appear in the dissertation, and look up how they develop and how they are some abandoned, some not, and so on in the rest of the work. I'm sure this will be a very revealing piece of study. Now, I don't really have much of questions, but I would like to point out a few detailed things which might be possibly of some use. As to the kind of somewhat surprising claims about phenomenology not having access to the actual and so on.
I know he actually says it there.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I was wondering how much of Ingarden can be behind this, because this is obviously the central concern of Ingarden. And I don't really have any evidence about how much Patočka was reading of Ingarden, but he certainly was reading the Jahrbuch. Jahrbuch was the main kind of source of information about the rest of phenomenological movement besides Husserl's writings, but of course one needs to bear in mind that 31, it means just the logical investigations and the ideas one. So Ingarden can be behind this, and also I would like to ask, with regard to some other point you made, whether surely you do know, but I do not remember at the point. Did Heidegger's Wesen für Wahrheit appear in the Jahrbuch in 30? It was 1930, but did it appear in the Jahrbuch or somewhere else?
I actually don't know, and I did check it, and I asked Ivan if he read any Heidegger, and the only, as Ivan pointed out, on page 70 there is one mentioning of Heidegger, and it is not Bingentan, it's the Kant.
Yeah, right. So I was just wondering, that piece about the adequatio res intellectum, whether this point would be drawn from Heidegger or not, and it would be interesting to see how much Patočka knew of Heidegger before 33. That would be another kind of really
interesting. Yeah, that's what I would be really interested, and I actually don't think he did much, and that's the reason why, in a way, I looked into this work. And yes, I am aware it's the first, as you are as well, his first work. But what I think is interesting about Patočka is his historical approach. So he actually outlines the historical trajectory of ideas and asks questions which then, in this last part, somehow never answers. But they are there, and I think those questions are to which he returns repeatedly.
Marcia.
Thank you. My question is more about the historical approach, because how do you understand the Patočka historical approach as the only access, as you proposed? Because I was thinking about the book about Aristotle that came now, he has a very large discussion at the end when he is responding to the critics he got, and he's saying, maybe there's a problem that this book is too historical. But so he sees the necessity of the historical approach, but the limits of the historical approach. So I don't see how you would connect the historical evidence to the question of evidence that he is addressing there. It's more speculative, not so philological, but how do you see, understand the philosophical problem of the historical approach in Patočka? That would be my question.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it seems to me when you consider his approach, and I'm not talking about the Aristotle and his inheritors. I think the Patočka cannot be understood without doing this historical approach, and he does have absolutely amazing knowledge of history and history of ideas. And I think it's who was doing the Ivan Strahovsky papers? Philip Karfik went through it, didn't he?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking because he was saying over the war, which is of course later than this, he did this enormous historical readings towards his book, which he never of course wrote because he couldn't work. But there is a same sort of preoccupation which seems to me right from the beginning. He is interested in history of ideas, and he's trying to see how those history of ideas influence our understanding. So I would say that he is doing it not like Heidegger, for example, trying to... No, I wouldn't go that way. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's important for him, history of ideas.
Emily, and then Mike.
Yes, thank you. Just a remark on a final point. You say, as Patočka claims, Husserl and Heidegger lost this appearing as such by stepping over to what already appears. I think it's right for Husserl, but it's not right for Heidegger.
He claims it for Heidegger as well, in the introduction to phenomenological
yes,
philosophy.
But it's wrong for Heidegger. I think if Patočka says it's for Heidegger, because the critics is that Heidegger lose this appearing as such by privileging the question of being over the question of appearing. So just
I actually have to reread the introduction to phenomenological philosophy because he actually unpacks it much more, and I didn't have time to look at it, but that would be maybe another paper.
okay.
Yeah, because I was surprised by it as well.
I just want to go for 5 more minutes. There's lots of hands up, but we'll just say Mike, Bert, and then Lucy, and then stop. Susie, sorry.
I have I guess a question of influence that is much like Josef's first question. On page 10 you write that in the 31 dissertation Patočka concludes that we have 2 flows of life that constitute the world in 2 different ways. One is the objective world of science, the other is the subjective world, the subjective world of various regions of values. And it's that second I'm interested in, especially given that within a couple of years of finishing this he would attend classes with Nikolai Hartmann, and given that in the interwar period Scheler was such a prevalent figure. And I'm curious if this early work exhibited any interaction with Scheler or Hartmann, who of course posited that values existed objectively.
I think you might want to see the values coming from the Neo-Kantians. And there was a big stress on the values, which later on, of course, Heidegger will question. And
so Scheler condemns the Kantian approach.
I suspect, I wouldn't want to say, but I think it's coming from Neo-Kantian.
But there's no real reference to Hartmann,
No.
Scheler.
Yeah. I had another question of influence, because it seems his notion of scientific nature is Kantian, not phenomenological. Right? The ideas, scientific nature is built from ideas of homogeneous space, time, and causality. But then there's the strange, this is what I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate, from which the subject is excluded. That doesn't seem like a Kantian move, right? The first thing sounds like competence, and I'm just curious if you could elaborate Patočka's.
I think, and I never thought of it, but I think Josef is right, might be still kind of, you know, the young Patočka writing. It seems to me, and that's what I've said to Michael, there might be influence, and I would have to look at it further, neo-Kantian influence.
But you could say maybe the phenomenological subject's excluded. That might make sense. But in the Kantian sense of saying the subject's excluded, that's...
Yeah, no, it actually is not their phenomenological subject. I would have to look at it again.
It could just be the Cartesian concept.
Cartesian.
I think so, that's what he
Standard
thinks.
standard modern interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's what he wants to say. You've got the objective nature, and you can't have a subject there because it's without qualities, without anything.
And to answer Josef, von Wesen der Wahrheit was not in the Jargon. It was von Wesen des Grundes. Susie.
Thank you, Ľubica. Just in noting the comment that Patočka makes about the objective and the subjective worlds, if you like, I wanted to pick up on our conversation from a couple of days ago, in that you were talking about noticing already openings towards his asubjective phenomenology in his PhD pieces, and I would just like to hear something about that.
The only thing which I found really interesting is that he actually speaks about this sort of, there has to be something which appears.
Sorry, could you say that again? Sorry.
There has to be something which appears, there is some being. I think it's a dative and a genitive of appearance. And you can find it in this work, so you have both sides. And then he sort of rethinks the idea of subject. But they are all kind of just, it's not elaborated, but they are there, and it just somehow seems strange within the framework of evidence to actually have this type of consideration. And that's what I'm thinking is, those things he comes back to and elaborates. They are already there. And my claim is because he's trying to get a historical trajectory, he somehow comes across these questions, which normally wouldn't, because he wants to understand how the empiricism and rationalism came and how it was the influence of Descartes.
Okay, if we're going to have any time for coffee, we should stop now and start again at 11. So thank you very much.